Serious. Crime scene cleaners, what was the most disturbing thing you had to take care of? As a fire department chaplain, a crucial part of my role was clearing the trauma from the room. So, I definitely count when it comes to dealing with grim scenes. I've cleaned up some truly horrific messes in my time. Shotgun suicides, homicides. But the most disturbing for me was a car accident involving an infant. He broke his neck, I think. No one else was too seriously injured, but prying that baby from his mother's arms is a moment forever seared into my brain. I can put adult corpses on gurneys all day, pick skull fragments out of a wall, or collect limbs from the side of a freeway without a problem. But the mother's wails, her desperate rocking, her vice-like grip on her child, and the very smell, sight, and feel of death on a person who hadn't even experienced life yet. It was just wrong. It felt wrong on the most primal level. I recently responded to a scene where someone jumped from a balcony onto the street below. The second and third floor balconies extended further out, and the impact was such that the person left pieces of themselves on the third floor before the rest continued their descent to the second. Another incident I attended a few years back was a suicide attempt in a nursing home. A woman had cut both her wrists and then waited to die. The problem was the wounds were too superficial. She had some time to kill, so she made herself a smoothie, watched TV, went to the bathroom, basically just went about her normal day. Eventually, she changed her mind and called for help. I performed this work for about 8 months and actually quite liked it. It was very interesting and rewarding. While the smells were always the worst part, one that particularly stands out was the suicide cleanup of a 16-year-old boy. He had taken all his clothes out of his closet, laid a few black garbage bags on the ground, and then sat there and shot himself once in the head. What made it so disturbing was the sheer amount of forethought that went into it. He clearly spent a significant amount of time preparing, and despite that, he still went through with it. It was truly heartbreaking. It wasn't quite the same, but I used to work IT at a small retirement home, and surprisingly, suicides happened more often than you'd think. Since it was a small operation, I sometimes helped out with other tasks like giving the maintenance guy a hand when he needed to move something heavy. One day, an older resident, no family, very quiet, took his own life. He left a letter addressed to the building administrator. It was neatly typed, thoughtful, even kind. He thanked the staff for taking good care of him and apologized for the trouble his death might cause. At the end, he asked if someone could please take care of his mice. There were a few strange things about the whole situation. The letter was unsettling because it was so calm and lucid. He was in good physical health, and he made what seemed to be a very deliberate, reasoned decision. That made it even more tragic. He just didn't see a reason to go on. He'd typed the note using the receptionist's computer. She'd even helped him a bit, assuming he was writing a letter to a friend or relative. But it was in Polish, which she couldn't read. When she found out later what it really was, she was understandably shaken. And, oddly enough, no one knew he had any mice. So, naturally, the maintenance guy was asked to check the room for mice. If they were running loose, that could become a problem. He asked me to help, thinking we might have to move furniture. Since the man hadn't died in his room, I figured I wouldn't be walking into anything traumatic. At first, we didn't see any signs of mice. No cage, no droppings, no smell. We were just about to start moving furniture when we realized no one had checked the drawers yet. That's when we found them. Not live mice, but dead ones, along with several small birds. All of them were taxidermied, dressed in tiny outfits, and displayed with little accessories and nameplates. It wasn't grotesque, exactly, more sad than anything. Like he'd created this tiny, frozen world to keep himself company. It was one of the most quietly heartbreaking things I've ever seen. Shotguns are incredibly messy. When a shotgun is used to the skull, it becomes a truly horrific scene. Brain matter explodes everywhere, coating every surface. It's incredibly tedious to clean because it literally gets everywhere. You have to meticulously comb through the entire room and everything in it. Even then, tiny, almost imperceptible bits and pieces of brain matter will be stubbornly stuck to things. I used to work next to an auto seat and top shop, and something truly grim happened near there. A guy shot himself in the head while sitting in his car during lunch in a remote part of his factory's parking lot. This was in July, and they didn't find the car for a week. The windows had been rolled up the whole time. The insurance company, surprisingly, didn't want to total the car. So, they had it completely gutted and reupholstered at the shop next to me. Apparently, he wasn't a good shot because his heart kept pumping until he bled out. The smell was putrid, and even after replacing everything soaked in blood, the odor had permeated even the harder surfaces of the car. I never found out what the insurance company did with it after that. Just a warning, never buy a baby blue early 90s Ford Topaz. While not the goriest, it was certainly the most haunting. A kid at my high school hanged himself. There was no blood, no burnt skin, no cracked skull, and no scooping brain matter from the floor. Just a purplish face, white eyes, and a tongue hanging out, as if he was trying to scream for help out of regret. And yes, I had to carry his corpse down 4 flights of stairs and heave it onto a truck so they could take him to a hospital, much like people tie a moose to the roof of their truck after hunting season. It sounds awful, and it was far worse than it sounds, but I don't know how else to describe the scene to you. If you're wondering why I had to do it, it's because I was a student who had, unfortunately, grown accustomed to carrying dead bodies. So, it was natural for people to ask me to carry a dead kid. The scenes I've cleaned up are typically the result of DUI or reckless driving. I've dealt with a lot of death and gore. Mostly, you try not to think about it and just load the vehicle without getting inside. Sometimes, you make dark jokes to lighten the sheer humanity of what you're seeing. It's not that you enjoy it. In fact, it'll sicken you to truly dwell on it. It's given me nightmares. It's grotesque work that would make even the most jaded live leak junkie puke in shame. I've seen vehicles torn in half, families carted away in meat wagons, and animals, including a moose, writhing with broken limbs. That last one actually hurts a little more. A few years ago, I had the unfortunate task of cleaning up a wreck, literally fishing it out of the trees of a guy I'd worked with at a different company a few years prior. I didn't know whose vehicle it was at the time and found out to my dismay a few days later. He was drunk and running from the sheriff's deputies. He'd gotten his pickup going fast enough down a curvy road that the deputies had backed off. Police edition Tahoes move very quickly. He lost it off a curve and crashed into some trees, getting stuck on its side and upside down about 4 feet off the ground. They used the jaws of life to cut open the cab of his truck and snip the seat mounts to pull him out of where the rear window/C-pillar used to be. He survived that night only because he was 30 seconds ahead of the LEOs and 5 minutes from a hospital with a helipad. The thing about a rollover is that all the junk in your cab, all the crap that's rolled under your seats over the years, all the stuff in your cubbies, hits the ground and we have to clean it up. On flat pavement, this goes pretty quickly with a shovel and trash bags. But because this incident was in the grass and brush, we were picking it up by gloved hand. Since the guy lived on the side of a mountain, he carried spare blankets, a sleeping bag, and pillows in his truck in case he was ever stranded. All of that soft stuff became body-sized tampons soaked in blood. It was the single bloodiest accident I've ever had to clean. In the course of cleaning, we found all the packaging from the medical equipment used in his rescue. Once they'd pulled him from the wreck, it seems they started saving his life right there on the pile of garbage. He was packed and shipped to a bigger metro hospital. They assumed he wouldn't live to stand trial, so they never took blood or breath samples for evidence of intoxication. Word even began to circle that he was dead. We weren't friends, but we were friendly. This was a guy I had known. We were in different apartments, but he'd helped me closely a few times before. He was a snowcat driver, and I was a snowcat mechanic. After a month in the ICU, he pulled through. 6 months or so after the accident, he stopped taking his blood thinners, either because he couldn't afford them or blew the money elsewhere. His blood clotted. The clot broke free and delivered a massive heart attack. He died twice. It's not from the crime scenes themselves, but one of the recurring messes I've encountered is dog poop. Most criminals seem to have a tendency to lack the discipline to let their dogs out, instead letting them go right there on the carpet. And they just leave it. Perhaps that is subtle insight into why they're criminals. They might be able to handle everyday functions enough to keep a job, but they lack the self-discipline to perform even the most basic chores. Not long ago, my aunt tragically took her own life. She called to say goodbye to my uncle, telling him he was a great father and that nothing would ever change that. Afterward, she used a shotgun. My grandfather, uncle, and I then had the grim task of cleaning the room. We spent hours scrubbing blood out of the carpet, the ceiling, and even my great-great-grandmother's quilt, which she had made for their daughter before she passed. My uncle still lives in that house with their daughter. While certainly not the most disturbing story compared to others in this thread, it's one that truly haunted me. I worked for a restoration company in marketing specifically and was involved with a very prominent double homicide in a small California town. The murders happened in broad daylight, and I was on site less than 12 hours after it occurred, standing in the exact spot where they were killed. First, I have to say, Hazmat does an absolutely incredible job. You literally could have eaten off the garage floor in that spot. There wasn't a speck of blood anywhere in that garage. It was disturbing to stand there, imagining what had happened just hours before. The poor family was utterly distraught, yet they remained incredibly kind to me, my company, and the countless police officers and CSI personnel coming in and out. I'm currently at work, so I can't go into the full details that some of the more unsettling cases deserve, but here are a couple of quick ones. One involved a stolen semi-truck. The suspect suffered a fatal heart attack inside the cab and wasn't discovered for about a week. Temperatures have been hovering between 70 and 80 degrees during that time. By the time authorities found him, the body had severely decomposed. We didn't end up getting called for that cleanup. Another memorable one involved an unattended death in a hot tub. The individual had a prosthetic leg, and while I don't recall exactly how long they were there, it was long enough for serious decomposition. When the coroner completed their part, they left the prosthetic leg floating in the tub. That cleanup turned out to be a real headache. As a fiduciary, I was often called in to handle a wide range of responsibilities tied to the estates of deceased clients. One particularly unforgettable case involved a woman who had passed away for natural causes. Part of our task was to enter her home and catalog everything inside. Tragically, she had a dog who survived her for a time, but eventually died of dehydration. Before that, he had desperately tried to chew his way through the front door in an attempt to escape. It was several months before anyone discovered what had happened. By that time, both the woman and her dog had decomposed to the point that their remains had melted into the carpet and seeped down into the concrete subfloor. When we arrived on site, it had become a full-blown hazmat situation. We had to wear full protective gear, suits, gloves, boot covers, and masks just to enter the property. The body had already been removed, but the house was still overwhelmed with the aftermath. There were millions of flies, both alive and dead, in every room. Our job was to first document and then dispose of every item in the home. Anything related to food preparation or storage, dishes, utensils, pantry goods, even the appliances, was classified as biohazard material and had to be discarded. You couldn't simply clean these things. They were beyond saving. The odor was indescribable, thick, putrid, and embedded into the very walls. That was my only experience cleaning up after a death, but it wasn't the only time I had to gear up like that. Being a fiduciary could be surprisingly intense. Honestly, it was metal. I was a patrolman in a rural area when I responded to a horrific scene. A 2 or 3-year-old child's head had been crushed when a car rolled over her in a driveway. The ambulance took the child away, leaving me to clean up the pile of remaining brain matter. Deaths involving children are, without a doubt, the absolute worst. This isn't exactly related to my personal experiences, but my father was a firefighter when I was an infant, and he once told me a harrowing story. He was responding to a house fire where there had been a report of an explosion from inside. It turned out that a man in the house had decided that shooting himself in the head with a shotgun was a better way to die than burning alive. My dad was the one who found the burned, headless corpse. My father-in-law, a paramedic, just told me a grim story. One time, an old man suffered a brain hemorrhage while walking down the stairs. He fell in such a way that his face became pressed against a radiator. No one found him for days, and the heating system kept cycling on, repeatedly cooking his face and melting it to the radiator. I used to work for a fire and water restoration company that also handled crime scene cleanups. I worked a few different types of scenes: suicides, murders, and natural causes. The absolute worst was the gun suicide of a 12-year-old boy. The body had already been removed by the time we arrived, but we had to clean up the blood and brain matter splattered across the walls. We also had to remove some of the furniture and cut out any pieces that had been contaminated. It It was incredibly hard to go through toys and cartoon-themed furniture, meticulously searching for blood and brain matter. I can only imagine what his parents were going through. I might be late to this, but my uncle once had to paint a hotel room after a triple homicide. The victims were nuns, and they had been dismembered in the hotel bathroom. He told me that instead of cleaning the walls, he was ordered to simply paint over the blood-splattered walls. He was paid double for the emotional distress he endured. I'm not a crime scene cleaner, but as military police, I often had to clean up scenes since dedicated cleaners weren't always available. I once responded to a suicide attempt by acid. This guy had started drinking some kind of acid, but regretted it and managed to call his neighbor. The local police were on vacation, so we took the call. We got the guy into the car, and there was blood and slime everywhere. My partner was making him throw up on the floor of the car, while the driver floored it to the closest helicopter-approved football field. The stench is still with me. Bile, rotten meat, and iron for some reason. We ended up power washing the interior of that car for 8 hours the next day. This reminds me of a heartbreaking story I once read on Reddit. The original poster's best friend had jumped off a cliff. When they found his body, he was shirtless. Intrigued, they checked the jumper's car at the top of the cliff, and there, neatly folded on the passenger's seat, was a shirt. It turned out that the original poster had lent his friend his favorite shirt at some point. Before he took his own life, the friend realized he was wearing it and, in a tragic act of consideration, didn't want to ruin his best friend's cherished item of clothing before jumping into oblivion. In that moment, that poor guy saw himself as less valuable than a t-shirt. Truly heartbreaking. My father once told me an incredible story about a coworker at Xerox, a maintenance man who was having some serious girl troubles. He became convinced the only solution was to shoot himself in the head with a crossbow. So, he went to his basement, awkwardly positioned the crossbow, and pulled the trigger. The force of the shot reportedly knocked him back several feet, slamming him against a concrete wall where he promptly passed out, an arrow sticking out of the back of his head. He woke up some time later, incredibly confused as to why he was still alive and, strangely, feeling fine. He walked upstairs to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and that's when he saw the arrow and a small stream of blood beginning to form. After a few minutes, the adrenaline started to wear off, and he began to feel some slight pain in his head. He called his mother, who, as any mother would, freaked out before driving over, picking him up, and taking him to the hospital. As far as my father knew, there was no brain damage. The arrow was removed, and he healed just fine, at least physically. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.